I started working the night shift at a small logistics warehouse outside of Kalamazoo in January of 2018. It wasn't the kind of job you dreamed about, but I was 22 and needed something steady while I figured out what I really wanted to do. The warehouse was owned by a regional shipping company. Boxes and pallets came in on trucks all day, got scanned and shelved, then loaded into other trucks for morning delivery. I was one of two people assigned to the overnight shift. The other guy was named Curtis, about 30 years older than me, divorced, quiet. We worked together for the first few nights, but after a week, Curtis switched to a different shift, and I ended up being alone from midnight to 8 a.m. 5 nights a week. The warehouse itself was shaped like a long L, concrete floors, steel walls, cold in winter even with the industrial heaters. The break room sat near the front of the building, past the main office. Then came the loading docks, about 8 of them in total. Along the narrow hallway that wrapped around the interior were the restrooms, a storage closet, and a stairwell that led to the mechanical mezzanine, which no one used except for the maintenance guys during scheduled repairs. The first month was uneventful. It was peaceful in a way. I listened to podcasts or music, kept things tidy, scanned inventory, and sometimes even got to nap in the break room when everything was quiet. It was just enough activity to stay awake, but never stressful. I didn't mind the silence. I liked it. Then February came, and things started to feel wrong. I don't know how else to explain it. It started with small things. My radio would cut out just for a second, usually around the same time every night, somewhere between 2:45 and 3 a.m. It wasn't the battery. I swapped it out twice, even brought my own from home. Still happened. Then came the cold spots. Sudden chills that would rush down a corridor, especially near Dock 5, the kind that made your breath visible, even with the heaters running. I asked Curtis about it once in passing when I saw him during a shift overlap. He paused, looked like he wanted to say something, then just said, "Old buildings do weird stuff. You'll get used to it." One night in early March, I was out on the main floor scanning shipments when I heard the office door creak open. It was slow, deliberate, distinct. I assumed someone had come in late, maybe one of the supervisors. I walked back toward the office and called out, "Hello?" No answer. The office lights were off. I checked the door. It was ajar, just a sliver of darkness beyond. I pushed it open, turned the lights on. Empty. Chairs still tucked in, computers off. I went back to work, chalking it up to air pressure or something mechanical. That explanation held until the next night when I found one of the loading bay doors. Dock 3, open about 3 inches. The exterior latch was still locked. That was impossible. I inspected it more closely. It was as though the door had been forced from the inside, just enough to let a sliver of wind in. I relocked it, wrote it up in the maintenance log, and moved on. But the sense of being watched started then, and it didn't let up. Sometimes when I walked past the motion sensor lights near the mezzanine stairwell, I'd see one flick on in the distance before I reached it. Once or twice, I caught the tail end of what looked like movement, just a shadow disappearing around a corner. I'd rush over, only to find nothing. The security cameras were grainy and old, barely functional at night, but I started checking them obsessively between rounds. I never saw anything. About a week later, things escalated. I was in the break room eating a sandwich, watching something on my phone when I heard the faintest tapping. Not a knock, not a creak, just tapping. It seemed to be coming from the hallway outside. I paused the video, thinking it might be a pallet shifting or a pipe ticking. The tapping stopped. I got up, opened the break room door, and peered out. No one was there. But the light at the end of the hall by the stairwell flickered once, just once, and went out. I walked slowly toward it, flashlight in hand, feeling the cold return. When I reached the door to the stairwell, I listened. I heard breathing. Not my own. It was low, wet-sounding, just below me. Someone breathing through their mouth. I gripped the handle, yanked the door open, and shined the flashlight down. Nothing. Just the concrete steps leading down to the locked maintenance room. The breathing stopped the moment the beam touched the lower floor. I slammed the door shut and locked it. That was the first night I didn't finish the shift. I sat in the break room with all the lights on, eyes on the hallway, until 7:45 when the next crew started arriving. I didn't tell anyone. I figured no one would believe me. Maybe I didn't believe myself. But the next night, I saw it. I was walking past the loading docks doing my usual scan when I noticed that the overhead light above Dock 5 was out. That area had always made me uncomfortable. The chill, the draft, that creeping sensation that something was just behind me. I moved toward it with the scanner and flashlight, intent on finishing quickly. The second I stepped under the darkened light, my scanner died. It didn't beep, didn't flicker, just shut off. My flashlight dimmed to a dull glow, flickering. Then I heard the tapping again. It was coming from inside one of the trailers parked at Dock 5. I backed away, slowly, not taking my eyes off the trailer. Then, from behind me, I heard a sharp click, like the sound of a tongue snapping against the roof of a mouth. I turned. Standing at the far end of the dock was a figure, pale, thin, hair hanging in long strands across its face. It didn't move there, arms at its sides, head tilted slightly. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. I blinked. It was gone. I dropped my flashlight, ran to the break room, and locked the door. I sat there, shaking until sunrise. I didn't sleep the next day. I kept seeing that shape in my head, long limbs, sunken skin, the way it stood so still, like it was listening. I came in the next night determined to prove it was all in my head. I brought a small GoPro, strapped it to my chest, and kept it running the whole time. I even spoke aloud to myself, narrating what I was doing. Around 3:12 a.m., I approached the mezzanine stairwell again. The motion light triggered before I got there. I caught it on camera. That gave me a jolt. As I stood there debating whether to investigate, the radio clip to my belt made a sound I hadn't heard before. A voice. At first, it was just static. Then a whisper. "He's coming." I froze. The voice was male, flat, emotionless. I pulled the radio off my belt. "Hello?" Nothing. Just more static. Then, soft laughter. Low, breathy. I turned it off and backed away, deciding I'd had enough for the night. But before I could reach the break room, every light in the building shut off. Complete darkness. Not a breaker. Not a flicker. They all just stopped. My flashlight wouldn't turn on. My phone, too. I pressed the buttons, held them down. Nothing. In the pitch black, I heard the footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming toward me. Then a knock. 3 of them. Loud. Right next to me. I ran blind. Slammed into a stack of crates. Tripped. Scrambled forward. I don't know how long I wandered. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. When the lights suddenly came back on, I found myself standing in the mezzanine stairwell, facing downward. I don't remember going there. My phone was on again, the flashlight worked, the GoPro still recording. I left immediately. Drove home on shaky legs. I watched the GoPro footage that afternoon. Most of it was uneventful. Grainy shots of boxes and aisles. But around the 3:12 mark, just after the lights went out, the screen flickered. For a moment, barely a second, you could see a face, inches from the lens, mouth open too wide, teeth too long, eyes like empty pits. Then darkness. I didn't go back. I called the site manager, said I'd quit, told him I didn't want to talk about it. 3 days later, Curtis called me. He said he'd seen something too, years ago, that they always gave new hires the night shift to see if it would leave them alone. I asked him what he saw. He paused for a long time, then said, "A woman with no eyes, standing in the trailer at Dock 5. I've been dreaming about her for 15 years. I didn't sleep much that night. I don't think I ever will again. Story the end. I used to work at a small-town library in upstate New York, nestled between a rundown laundromat and a shuttered pharmacy. It wasn't the kind of place most people even knew was still open. But we had regulars, retirees, homeschoolers, the odd college student with a broken laptop. The building itself was ancient. No exaggeration. It had been built in 1891, originally a courthouse, then a records hall, and finally converted into a library sometime in the 60s. I worked the late shift alone from 2 p.m. until close at 10. Everyone else left by 6:30, sometimes earlier. It was an old building with all the problems you'd expect. Creaky floors, radiators that hissed and clanged, and a heating system that made the walls hum like a tuning fork. I always brushed off the noises. That's just what old buildings do. The first time I really felt something was off was a Wednesday evening in late October. It had gotten dark early, and I was shelving books in the history section, which was tucked away in the back right corner near the microfiche room. That part of the library always felt heavier somehow, like the air was thicker. I had just placed a thick Civil War tome back on the top shelf when I heard it. A whisper. Just one word, hissed like it was pulled through teeth. Wait! I stood still for a good 10 seconds, waiting to hear it again, heart knocking in my chest. I wasn't playing music. No one else was in the building. The lights were on, but the long, narrow aisles between shelves always created little pockets of shadow. I told myself it was the plumbing. Old pipes do weird things. I moved on, shelving faster than usual. That same week, I started noticing misplaced books. Not just the usual stuff where someone sets a romance novel in the biography section. These were books from the locked archive room, first editions, rare historical texts, sitting on tables or in return bins. That archive room required a key only I had access to, and I kept it on a chain attached to my belt. I started double-checking every night. I'd make sure the archive room door was locked tight. I even began placing a small folded piece of paper in the door jamb, so if it was opened, I'd know. Twice in 1 week, I found the paper on the floor. The security system was ancient. It only monitored the front and back doors. No motion sensors, no cameras inside. The town didn't have the budget, and the board never approved the upgrades. I brought it up to my supervisor, Carla, but she just gave me the same tired smile and said, "Ghosts don't need books, Greg." One night, I was sitting at the front desk around 9:30, scrolling through overdue notices, when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye near the children's section. I stood up fast, thinking someone had snuck in or stayed past hours. I called out, "We're closing soon." Nothing. I walked slowly over to the section. A book lay open on the carpet. I bent to pick it up. It was an old, battered copy of Goodnight Moon. The odd part was it wasn't even a circulation copy. That book had been removed 2 years prior due to damage. I recognized the torn spine. We'd boxed it up to be recycled. There was no reason it should have been there. I checked the back door. Still locked. Front door too. Every window still bolted shut. I told myself someone was playing a prank. Maybe one of the other workers. But I hadn't mentioned the archive books to anyone but Carla. The following week, I started hearing footsteps, not random creaks. Definite, deliberate footsteps. Slow and dragging, mostly in the history wing. I tried to ignore it at first. Old buildings, right? But it kept happening. Always between 9:15 and 9:45. Always when I was alone. I'd walk to the source only to find nothing. Eventually, I left my phone recording audio at the end of one of the shelves and went back to my desk. That night, I listened to it after getting home. It started with silence, then the faintest of footsteps, shuffle, pause, shuffle, then a long, low sigh right next to the phone. I played it 3 times. The sigh chilled me every time. I showed it to Carla the next morning. She didn't laugh this time. She didn't say anything, just handed me back the phone and walked into her office. That night, the lights in the back hall started flickering. The breaker box hadn't been touched. I just changed the bulbs last week. I walked back to fix them and saw a figure standing by the reference desk. It wasn't a shadow, it was a person, or something shaped like one. It didn't move. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell anyone. Then came the knocking. 3 short raps. Always on the glass of the archive room door. I tried to ignore it the first night, but it kept happening. Once at 9:17, again at 9:34, and once more at 9:41. I wrote the times down. The pattern repeated the next night. The door never opened, but the knocking didn't stop. I finally opened the archive room, walked in, and said out loud, "If someone's here, you need to go. I work here. You don't." No response. Just the soft hum of the heating vent. I stood there for 5 minutes before backing out and locking the door again. When I turned around, someone had written the word "stay" on the fogged-up window of the office next door. No one else was in the building. I had just checked. I started keeping the lights fully on in every section. It didn't help. One night, I found every clock in the building stopped at exactly 9:38 p.m. I took a picture. The next day, they were all working again. Then came the final night. I almost didn't go in. Something felt wrong from the moment I woke up. A weight in my chest I couldn't shake. But I showed up anyway, because I needed the money, and part of me still didn't believe anything was really happening. At 8:15, while shelving returns, I heard the front bell ring. No one was there. The door was still locked. The bell rang again. I ran to the front, faster this time. Still no one. But this time, there was something new. A photograph sitting on the counter, black and white, curled edges. It showed the library from decades ago. And in the photo, behind the old counter, stood a man. Slumped shoulders, thin tie, blank expression. He looked almost exactly like me. The caption on the back was dated 1964. Gregory, last shift. I dropped the photo and left. I didn't clock out. I didn't turn off the lights. Carla called me the next day asking what happened. I told her I quit. She didn't argue. 2 weeks later, I passed by the library. Lights off, sign on the door saying temporarily closed for maintenance. No explanation. A month later, the library was open again, but Carla had retired early. No one replaced her. They hired all new staff. I never went back inside, but sometimes late at night I dream of walking those aisles again, always around 9:38 p.m., always hearing that knock on the glass, and always seeing that figure just out of reach, waiting. Story the end. It was close to midnight when the storm started to pick up. Wind pushed hard against the windows, and rain drummed steadily against the glass like fingers tapping in warning. The parking lot lights outside flickered occasionally, casting short, strange shadows across the linoleum floor of the small regional newspaper office where I worked the late shift 3 nights a week. It was a lonely job, editing and formatting news articles before uploading them to our outdated CMS. Most of the time, I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I preferred it. Until that one night. The building wasn't much. A single floor, old brick exterior, and a layout that hadn't changed since the 1980s. The office had once housed dozens of reporters and editors, but budget cuts over the years had stripped it down to a skeleton crew. By the time I got there around 8 p.m., most everyone was already gone. On a good night, there might still be 1 or 2 ad designers or a sales rep wrapping up, but that night, the lot was empty. I was alone. Or I thought I was. I had just finished uploading a crime beat story about a recent home invasion when the lights overhead flickered again, this time staying dim for a couple seconds longer. My computer screen dimmed with them, then flared back to full brightness. A loud click echoed from down the hallway, followed by a soft creak. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself it was probably just the air pressure shifting because of the storm, maybe a vent causing one of the old office doors to swing open. Still, I got up and peeked out into the hallway. The corridor lights were still on, though one at the far end blinked irregularly. I walked a few steps toward the noise, just enough to confirm that the door to the old conference room was now slightly ajar. That room hadn't been used in years. There was a dusty whiteboard still mounted on the wall in there, some stacks of broken chairs, and a forgotten filing cabinet. No one ever went in there. I closed the door slowly, not wanting the loud click of the latch to echo too much, and returned to my desk. I put on my headphones and turned on some low instrumental music to drown out the storm. The strange creak had unsettled me, but I was trying not to let my imagination run wild. I kept working. Maybe half an hour passed before I noticed something strange again. My headphones cut out mid-track, not like a pause, but like the whole device disconnected. I took them off and checked the jack. Nothing wrong. I set them aside and was about to go back to work when I realized the office had gone eerily quiet. No rain against the windows. No wind howling. Just complete, unnatural silence. I stood up and walked to the window near my cubicle. The trees outside were still moving violently, their silhouettes thrashing in the parking lot lights. I pressed my ear against the glass. The storm was still there, but I couldn't hear any of it. Inside the offices, it was like someone had placed a thick vacuum dome over everything. I felt my chest tighten. I turned and was about to walk back to my desk when I noticed something even stranger. The door to the conference room was open again. Not just open, wide open. I hadn't heard it creak this time. No shift in air pressure, no movement, but it was undeniably open, revealing only the dark space inside. No light, just blackness. I froze, staring at it for a long minute. Then, slowly, I walked toward it again, heart pounding louder with each step. I pushed the door closed, this time a little more firmly, and gave it a solid tug to make sure the latch held. As I turned to leave, I heard a whisper. Not a voice in my head, not the wind. A real whisper. It came from inside the conference room. I don't remember exactly what it said. It was too faint. But it sounded like someone breathing a single garbled word. I ran back to my desk, grabbed my phone, and called Dave, my supervisor. He picked up on the second ring. "You still in the office?" "Yeah," I said, pacing by my desk. "I think someone might be in here with me." "What do you mean?" I don't know. I keep hearing things. Doors opening, whispering." He was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "You've been alone too long. It's probably just the building settling. That place is practically falling apart." "No, Dave," I said, my voice lowering. "This isn't the building. Someone's in here." He hesitated. "I'll call building security. Just stay put. If anything feels off, leave. You don't need to finish tonight's batch." I nodded, hung up, and stood there, trying to calm my breathing. I sat back down and started saving my files, preparing to leave. That's when I heard footsteps. They weren't quiet. They were slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the hallway, past the conference room. I leaned slightly, peering out from my cubicle, but couldn't see anyone. The steps continued, then stopped. I ducked back, heart racing. My phone buzzed. A text from Dave. "Security says no one's in the building. Want me to come over?" Before I could reply, the footsteps started again. But this time, faster, closer, coming down the hallway, heading straight toward the editorial department. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted through the side emergency exit, the one that led out to the smoker's lot. I didn't even grab my jacket or my bag. The second I pushed open the door, I was met with the full force of the storm. Rain soaked me instantly, but I kept running to my car. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat there staring at the building. No one came out, no movement in the windows. I waited 15 minutes before driving off. The next morning, I came back with Dave and the building manager. We walked through the entire office. Nothing was out of place, except the conference room door was wide open again. On the whiteboard inside, written in dust with a fingertip, was a single word: "Stay." There were no footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. I took the next week off. When I returned, I was never left alone again. Management quietly adjusted the schedule to make sure two people always overlapped for the late shifts. No one ever gave an official reason, but I heard rumors, stories that I wasn't the first person to experience something in that building. A reporter in the 90s had allegedly claimed to see someone sitting in the conference room during a storm, an unfamiliar man in a suit with no face. Another editor had resigned suddenly in 2006 after refusing to work past 9 p.m. He'd never explained why. There was no history of violence, no reported deaths in the building. But sometimes I think about that silence, the way the storm seemed to mute itself inside, the way the air felt thick, heavy, like being underwater, and that whisper, faint but intentional, speaking just to me from a room that should have been empty. I never saw anyone, never got a clear glimpse of a shadow, a hand, a face, but I know with absolute certainty that I was not alone that night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run, if I had waited just another minute, listened longer, answered the whisper. Story the end. It was well past midnight when I realized I was the only one left in the building. The office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that starts to feel oppressive. I was working late again, trying to meet a deadline for a client presentation that had already been pushed twice. Our firm had moved into a new building a few months back, a newly renovated 5-story glass structure in a relatively empty part of the industrial district. During the day, the open-plan office buzzed with energy, but at night it became hollow and eerie. The building had motion sensor lights that only turned on in zones when someone entered. That night, the lights in my section, the 3rd floor, were the only ones on. Everything else was black, a void pressing in from the periphery. Occasionally, I'd see a light flick on in a hallway briefly, only to realize it was just me stretching or adjusting my chair, triggering the sensors. I should have gone home at 10, like I'd promised myself, but when I get in the zone, I lose time. Around 12:17 a.m., I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes. That's when I noticed it, the soft sound of typing coming from a few desks away. I froze. I turned around, expecting to see someone, maybe Natalie, who occasionally stayed late too, but there was no one. I listened, holding my breath. The typing stopped. The layout of our floor was simple. Rows of desks separated by low dividers, a few small meeting rooms on the sides, and glass-walled offices near the windows. The break room was to the far right, with a vending machine that made a high-pitched hum. I stood up slowly, walked toward the direction of the typing, my footsteps unnervingly loud against the carpeted floor, and looked over each cubicle as I passed. Nothing. No one. The screens were all off. I waited a moment, then laughed at myself. It was probably just the sound of my own typing bouncing off the glass walls or an auditory hallucination from exhaustion. I sat back down and resumed working. About 15 minutes later, I heard the sound again. But this time, it wasn't typing. It was a chair rolling, followed by the soft squeak of leather as if someone had just sat down. I stood up so fast my chair toppled behind me. My heart was pounding. I called out, "Hello," hoping someone would answer. Silence. Then, a low creak from the far end of the floor, like the weight of someone shifting in a chair. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Its narrow beam cut through the darkness like a knife. I walked slowly, sweeping the light left and right. I checked behind every partition, every desk, even inside the glass meeting rooms. Nothing. My breath fogged up the glass as I leaned in to check. I went back to my desk and sat for a while debating whether to just go home. But something inside me didn't want to leave. I needed to know if I was really alone. I opened Slack on my laptop and checked to see if anyone else was still online. No green dots. I opened the security app linked to our office system, something IT had set up for after-hours access, and looked at the security feed. 4 cameras, lobby, elevators, parking garage, and main entrance. All showed nothing. Empty. I switched to playback mode and rewound the last hour. Around 11:45 p.m., the footage showed someone getting off the elevator on my floor. I paused. The figure was tall, with long hair, walking with an unnatural stiffness, as if unsure how to use their limbs properly. They wore what looked like an old-fashioned coat, something out of the 1930s. No one from the office dressed like that. But there was something else. The face was turned away from the camera, and even when the person stepped into the light, their features were blurred, like a glitch in the footage. I skipped ahead in the footage. The person never left the floor. I checked the live feed again. Nothing. Still empty. I was about to close the laptop when I heard it again. Typing. Not from my floor, but from the floor above. I froze. The 4th floor had been empty for weeks. Our company hadn't leased it out yet. There were no tenants, no furniture, just bare floors and exposed ducts. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone from the building management was inspecting it. Maybe security was doing rounds. I grabbed my keys and walked toward the stairs. I didn't want to wait for the elevator. If someone was messing with me, I didn't want to be trapped inside a box with them. As I climbed the stairs, each step felt heavier. The moment I reached the 4th floor and pushed the door open, the typing stopped. The floor was pitch black. My flashlight flickered slightly as I stepped in. The space was hollow, with concrete floors and support beams, plastic still wrapped around some of the columns. Dust coated the windows. But there was something else, fresh footprints in the dust, a trail of them, leading across the floor toward the back. I followed them. Halfway in, I noticed the smell. Damp, metallic, like rusted iron mixed with something else, something foul and organic. It was subtle, but it caught in the back of my throat. The footprints ended near a half-unwrapped desk, the kind our office used. There was a chair in front of it, and on the desk, a keyboard. A very old, yellowed mechanical keyboard. I bent down to examine it. Dust covered the keys. I stood up and turned to leave. And then I heard the chair roll behind me. Slowly, I turned around. The chair was spinning, just slightly but unmistakably, as if someone had gotten up from it seconds ago. I backed away slowly. That's when I saw the figure. At the far end of the room, near the freight elevator doors, a silhouette stood, motionless. It was the same person I'd seen on the security feed. The coat, the height, the strange stillness. But now I could see their face. Or rather, the absence of one. It was pale, almost white, smooth, featureless. Like someone had stretched a latex mask over a skull. I couldn't move. The figure began walking toward me, jerky steps like a puppet. I turned and ran through the stairwell, skipping steps, barely able to breathe. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby. But when I got there, the security guard was gone. The front desk was empty, no lights in the lobby. I ran to the parking garage and nearly dropped my keys trying to get into my car. As I pulled out, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and I swear I saw someone standing at the glass door, watching me. Their hand was raised, palm flat on the glass. The next morning, I returned to the office with two coworkers. I didn't tell them what happened, just said I thought I saw someone break in. We went up to the fourth floor. The footprints were gone. So was the desk. No sign of the keyboard or the chair. Nothing but dust. Later that week, I asked building management if there had been any contractors or security rounds on the fourth floor that night. They checked the logs. No one had accessed it. No security guard on duty after 10 p.m. because of a schedule change. The guard, who usually worked nights, had quit unexpectedly 2 weeks prior and hadn't been replaced yet. I avoided staying late after that, but sometimes when I'm alone, I hear that typing again, faint, distant, like someone trying to finish something they started a long time ago. And occasionally, on quiet nights, the elevator stops on the fourth floor without anyone pressing the button. Story the end. It started with the night shift. I worked at a small news radio station nestled on the second floor of a rundown building on the edge of town. It was one of those operations where half the equipment was older than I was, and the other half was broken most of the time. My job, though, was relatively simple. Monitor the overnight programming, record weather alerts if they came through, and make sure the station didn't go off the air. It was boring. For the first few weeks, the worst thing that happened was a raccoon getting into the garbage outside or a commercial playing twice in a row. The building was mostly deserted by 9 p.m., and I'd be alone until about 5:30 a.m. when the morning guy came in. Sometimes I'd bring snacks, play music low while I worked, read books, or browse through endless Wikipedia rabbit holes on the station's office computer. The first strange thing that happened, I didn't think much of. It was maybe 2 or 3 weeks into working alone overnight. I was getting up to refill my coffee around 1:30 a.m. when I passed by the front lobby area and noticed the outer glass door was cracked open. Just a few inches. I didn't hear it open, and I was certain I'd locked it earlier. The inner door, one of those with a push bar, was still shut. It was weird, but I convinced myself maybe it hadn't latched properly. I stepped out, pulled the door shut, and twisted the little metal knob to lock it again. I even tugged on it to make sure it caught. Then I went back to the studio, told myself to stop getting spooked so easily, and didn't think about it for the rest of the shift. A few nights later, though, something similar happened again. This time, I came back from the restroom, which was down the hallway and near the stairwell, to find that one of the doors to the conference room was open. Not wide, just enough that I could see into the darkness beyond. We never used that room overnight. Nobody ever went in there after hours. It creeped me out, but I assumed maybe one of the evening shift people had left it ajar and I hadn't noticed until now. I pushed it closed and moved on. But then it kept happening. Always something small. A light I was sure I'd turned off would be on. A drawer in the break room cracked open when I hadn't touched it. The bathroom faucet dripping. A computer monitor blinking awake in the newsroom area when I passed by, even though I was the only one logged into anything. One night, I even came back from a smoke break to find my rolling chair slowly swiveling to a stop, like someone had just stood up from it. I started locking myself inside the studio at night just to be safe. I'd slide the bolt on the interior door, check it a couple of times, and keep the hallway lights off so I couldn't see shadows passing by the glass. It made me paranoid. I started carrying a small utility knife in my back pocket and wedged a rubber doorstop under the main entrance to the studio, just in case. I told my boss I thought someone might be sneaking into the building after hours, maybe a homeless person or someone with a grudge against the station, but they just waved it off. Said we didn't even get enough listeners to attract that kind of attention. And then one night, things escalated. It was just after 2 a.m. I was doing a routine check on the broadcast automation system when I heard a soft tapping from somewhere in the hallway. Not loud, just a slow, rhythmic knock. Not at the door, but on the wall. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I sat still in the chair, every nerve in my body suddenly alert. At first I thought maybe it was just the pipes. The building was old, after all, but then I heard it again, this time closer. I crept over to the door and pressed my ear against it. For a few seconds there was only silence. Then, knock, 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 right against the other side of the door. I jumped back, heart hammering. Whoever or whatever was out there knew where I was. I reached for my phone, but it was sitting on the counter by the window. I moved slowly, grabbed it, and called 911 with my back pressed to the wall. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I heard the door handle rattle gently, not forced, just turned back and forth slowly. 911, what's your emergency? I think someone's in the building with me, I whispered. I work at WQJR Radio on the east side. I'm in the studio and someone's trying to get in. Is the door locked? Yes. They were knocking on the door. I heard them. We're sending a unit. Stay where you are. Keep the door locked. I stayed on the line as the knock stopped. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The operator told me the officer was on his way up the stairs. I didn't hear footsteps, but I could hear a soft creaking near the end of the hallway, like someone shifting their weight on the old wooden floor. Then the knock came again, this time at the window. I turned slowly and saw a silhouette just outside the big glass window of the studio room. But here's the thing. There's no ledge out there. The window faces the back alley, and there's a drop of at least 15 feet to the ground. Whoever was standing there had to be balancing on the thin metal lip of the HVAC access or somehow suspended. I couldn't see a face, just a black shape, unmoving. The police officer arrived less than a minute later, and when he came through the door downstairs, the silhouette vanished. The cop checked the building top to bottom. Nothing. He said all the outer doors were still locked. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no scuff marks on the window ledge. He offered to stay until my shift ended, but I said no. I just wanted the last few hours alone to collect my thoughts. I didn't work the next night. When I came back 2 days later, I brought a flashlight, 2 knives, and a small can of pepper spray, just in case. That night was quiet, too quiet. No knocks, no doors moving, no unexplained lights. I started to convince myself I just had a stress-induced panic. Maybe I imagined the silhouette. Maybe the knocks were just the building settling. I told myself that over and over. But the week after that, I found something that changed everything. It was a handwritten note taped to the underside of my desk. I only found it because I dropped my pen and bent down to look for it. In black marker on a yellow scrap of lined paper, it said, "I see you when you leave at 5:37. Your car lights are too bright." That was the exact time I left. Every morning, right after my shift, the handwriting was jerky, uneven. I took the note, folded it up, and didn't tell anyone. I started changing up my routine. I parked in different spots, left at random times, entered through the back door instead of the front. 2 days later, I found another note, this time in the break room fridge, folded and taped to my Tupperware lid. "Your food smells like plastic. You chew too loud." I threw the whole container away and didn't eat again at work. The cameras in the building hadn't worked in years, but I asked my boss to get them fixed. He said it wasn't in the budget. I started sleeping with the light on at home. I kept dreaming I was trapped in the studio, but it was underwater, and I couldn't reach the door. I'd wake up gasping, feeling like someone was standing just out of sight, right outside my bedroom. One night, about a month after the window incident, everything came to a head. It was storming outside, heavy rain, wind slamming against the building like it wanted in. The power flickered around midnight but held steady. I was doing an audio check when I heard a soft voice from the hallway. Just one word. "Help." It was so faint I thought it might have been in my head. I opened the studio door just a crack and listened. Nothing. Then, "Help me." Closer. I stepped out into the dark hallway. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I moved forward. I had the flashlight in one hand, the knife in the other. The hallway felt colder than usual. I walked past the break room, past the newsroom, and stopped near the conference room. The door was open. The light inside was flickering. I'd turned it off earlier, I was sure of it. I pushed the door the rest of the way open. Empty chairs. A long table. And on it, laid out in neat rows, were all the notes. Dozens of them, some on notebook paper, some on Post-its, some written in pen, some in thick marker. All of them were messages to me. Some I recognized, others I'd never seen. "I see you scratching your arm. You snore in the chair sometimes. I know what your eyes look like closed. You left the break room at 3:12 last Tuesday. I saw you cry when you dropped your sandwich." Some were angry. Some were sad. A few had symbols drawn on them, Shaky spirals, stick figures with their heads missing, something that looked like a cat with a human face. I backed out of the room, shaking. That's when I heard the door to the stairwell open and shut. Quick, deliberate. I ran back to the studio, locked the door, and didn't move until morning. I quit the job the next day. No one believed me. I didn't care. I told them to check the conference room if they didn't believe me. My boss called later that night, said there was nothing in there, no notes, no mess, said the janitor hadn't reported anything strange either. I still don't know what I saw. I still dream about the hallway, about the notes. Sometimes I hear the voice when I'm walking alone at night, just behind me, saying, "Help me." I don't think it was ever asking for help. I think it was practicing how to sound human. Story the end. It started on a Thursday night, one of those slow, drizzly evenings that soaked the city in a dull, constant gray. I was working the closing shift at a small independent bookstore downtown, the kind of place that only got busier when the rain came, but never late at night. The owner, Mrs. Cartwright, was old-fashioned and refused to install cameras or any digital security system. A bell above the door and good instincts, she always said. I'd laughed at that before. I didn't anymore. I'd been working there for nearly a year. My classes were in the morning, and the job was perfect. Quiet, predictable, and just enough to keep me afloat. I knew every shelf, every squeaky floorboard, every shadow cast by the dusty yellow overhead lights. That night, I was completely alone after 8, just me and the rain tapping against the windows. There was only one customer that evening, a man in a dark hooded coat. He didn't say a word when he came in. He just nodded and started walking around the aisles. I offered my usual, "Let me know if you need anything," but he didn't respond, just kept walking. I remember thinking he walked like someone who had been in the store before, casual, not browsing, not reading spines. He didn't stop to look at anything, not really. He just made loops through the store. That's when I started feeling it, that weird awareness you get when someone's watching you. I would turn around to check if he was near, and he was always just far enough away to pretend like he wasn't looking at me. But every time I moved, he seemed to adjust his path to intersect mine again. He left without buying anything. I never heard the bell chime again after that. When I glanced out the front window, I couldn't see him. I figured he was gone. I locked the door at 9 on the dot, as always, turned off the front lights, and started the nightly routine. The silence in the store became oppressive, like it was heavier than usual, absorbing the creaks and clicks of the old building. I was in the back room, inventorying a shipment of old poetry books, when I heard it, floorboards creaking out in the main area. The front door was locked. The bell hadn't rung again. I stood still, not even breathing. The creaking stopped. I told myself it was the building settling, like even though I'd worked that shift dozens of times and had never heard it make a sound like that. Still, I stepped out and looked around. Nothing. Nothing. The light over the true crime section was flickering a little, but that wasn't new. I walked the whole store just to be sure. No one. Nothing out of place. I told myself I was being jumpy, probably spooked by that guy earlier. I finished the inventory, closed up, and left through the back alley entrance. The next night was almost identical. The rain came again, and again the same man came in. Same hood, same silence. He walked slower this time. No eye contact, no voice, just steps. This time he made 3 loops around the middle aisle before standing still in front of the occult section. He didn't move, he didn't even seem to read the titles. He just stood there for over 10 minutes. Then, without picking up a single book, he turned around and walked out. That same heavy silence returned almost instantly, like something had been following him and decided to stay. I locked the door earlier than usual that night, feeling anxious. I don't know why, but I started leaving the light on in the back hallway. I told myself it helped with inventory, but I think it was because I needed some kind of barrier against the dark corners of that place. At about 10 past 9, I heard the sound of pages flipping. That caught me off guard. It was distinct, dry paper being turned deliberately. Not rustling, not a breeze, just flipping. I thought maybe I'd left a book open on the counter. I checked. Nothing. I walked slowly through the aisles, expecting to find some animal or maybe an open window. There was a book on the floor in the occult section. Rituals of Binding and Reflection. I didn't recognize the title. We carried some strange stuff, sure, but I kept track of everything. This one hadn't come in any shipment I'd ever logged. I picked it up, felt its weight, the roughness of the cover, definitely old. When I opened it, I saw handwriting scrawled in the margins. Not notes, names, just names, written over and over again, sometimes scratched out violently. My name was on the last page. I dropped the book so fast it hit the floor with a thud loud enough to startle me. I grabbed my coat, flicked off the lights without finishing inventory, and practically ran out the back door. I didn't even turn to lock it. The next day, I told Mrs. Cartwright about the guy and the book. She brushed it off, said the book was probably a donation someone slipped in, and that the guy was just some weirdo. I asked her if she'd ever seen him before. She paused, then said no. But she didn't sound convinced. That night, I found the book sitting on the front counter when I came in. I hadn't brought it there. That Cartwright hadn't been in all day. I called her to ask if she'd been in. She said no, and I could tell she was annoyed, told me not to waste time on spooky nonsense. I should have quit then. I wrapped the book in 2 plastic bags, stuffed it under the counter, and left it there. I didn't even want to touch it again. That night, around 8:30, I heard the bell ring. No one was there. I watched the door for a while, waiting for someone to appear. I walked up and checked the lock, still engaged. The bell above the door was still swaying gently. Then I heard it again. Pages flipping. I was frozen in place. The sound came from the center aisle this time. I slowly walked toward it. The lights in the back half of the store flickered, then went out. I stopped walking. There was someone standing at the end of the aisle. I could see the outline in the dim light. The hood, the shape of him. He wasn't moving. I backed away slowly and, not turning around, just inching toward the front door. Then he started walking, but not toward me. He stepped into the shadows of the history section, disappearing like he'd melted into the shelves. That was the first time I called the police. They came, checked the place top to bottom, found nothing. The door hadn't been tampered with, no signs of entry. They chalked it up to stress, said maybe I was tired or imagining things. I stopped telling people after that. I kept working the shift because I needed the money, but every night got worse. Books fell off shelves, light bulbs blew out for no reason. The bell rang when no one was there. Once, I saw something move in the mirror behind the register, a shape that didn't belong. When I turned around, nothing. But the worst thing was the voice. It started as a whisper, barely audible over the sound of the rain or the hum of the old heater. Just a few syllables. My name. Then a laugh. Not loud, soft and broken, like someone trying not to be heard. Sometimes I'd find notes written on slips of paper tucked into books. He sees you. Don't stay late. Close the door. I tried to convince myself I was doing it, that it was some sleep-deprived hallucination, until I found one taped to the inside of the bathroom mirror. That same night, the power went out. The whole store went black just after I locked up. My phone battery was dead, and I couldn't find the flashlight. I stumbled toward the back door, using the little red glow from the exit sign. Then I heard it. Someone breathing behind me. Not far, just behind the row of shelves near the children's section. Deep, wet breathing, like whoever it was had been running. I bolted. Didn't care about the door alarm or my stuff. I slammed the back door open and didn't look back. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the 24-hour diner down the street until morning. When I came back the next day with Mrs. Cartwright, everything was in place. The lights worked, no signs of damage, no book on the counter. She said if I couldn't handle the atmosphere, maybe I should look for something else. I didn't argue, but I needed the money. So I stayed one more week. On my final night, the store felt colder than usual. I turned on every light I could and left the back door unlocked. I just wanted to get through the shift. At around 8:45, I looked up from restocking and saw the man in the hood standing at the end of the aisle. Not walking, just standing. I turned to grab the phone, but it was dead, no dial tone. When I looked back, he was gone. I ran, full sprint. Out the back. Didn't even grab my coat. I never went back. A month later, I walked by the store. The windows were dark, closed permanently, a for lease sign taped on the glass. I tried to find Mrs. Cartwright, but she was gone. No forwarding address, no number, nothing. I still don't know what that place was. Sometimes when I walk alone on rainy nights, I swear I hear the sound of pages flipping nearby, or a bell, faint and sharp. I've moved 3 times since, thrown out every old book I owned, but every so often I find a slip of paper tucked into my belongings. Same handwriting, same message. He sees you. It was the Friday before Eid, and almost everyone at the corporate office had taken the day off. I wasn't particularly religious, and with my family out of the country, I figured I might as well get ahead on some backlog. I worked in IT support for a mid-sized logistics company in Dhaka. We had multiple floors in a commercial building in Banani, but the main server room, our beating heart, was on the top floor. That was where I needed to be that evening. A colleague had reported irregular packet loss from one of the central routers, and while it wasn't an emergency, I wanted to fix it before things piled up after the holiday. The building was eerily quiet when I arrived at 5:30 p.m. Normally bustling with voices, keyboard clicks, and ringing phones, it now echoed my own footsteps as I climbed the last 2 floors. I could have taken the elevator, but had a habit of acting up late at night. Sudden jerks, flickering lights. Maintenance swore it was fine, but I didn't trust it. The server room sat at the end of a narrow hallway, accessible by a biometric lock. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, waited for the green light, and stepped into the cold, humming space filled with blue LEDs and blinking activity lights. The temperature was always at a chill 18 degrees Celsius to keep the systems cool. I pulled on a hoodie and plugged in my laptop to the switchboard. For the first half hour, everything was routine. I traced the connectivity issues back to a firewall rule that had looped improperly. Nothing major. I made a note of it in the ticketing system. That's when I heard it, a soft knock behind me. I turned around quickly. The server room door was still closed and locked. The walls were reinforced. No one could knock from the outside and expect to be heard clearly. But I had heard it, a distinct, deliberate knock, like fingernails tapping on metal. I stood still, watching the door, expecting maybe another knock. Nothing. I walked up to it, unlocked it, and peeked into the hallway. Empty. The corridor was lit only by the emergency lights now, casting a dull yellow hue and long shadows down the length of the hall. I stepped out and looked both ways. Not a sound. I returned to the server room, locked the door again, and tried to refocus. 10 minutes later, my screen flickered. Then a series of rapid keystrokes appeared in the terminal, lines of nonsense. I froze, hands off the keyboard. I wasn't typing. It was as if someone else had control. I disconnected the machine from the network immediately. The keystrokes stopped. I checked the logs. No remote access, no known intrusion attempts. Still, it unsettled me enough to power down and switch to another laptop from the cabinet. As I booted it up, the overhead fluorescent light buzzed and blinked. Once, twice. Then the knock came again, this time louder. 3 hard raps on the metal server rack right behind me. I whipped around and saw nothing, just rows of humming machines. The air felt heavier now. It's hard to describe, as if the room were shrinking, compressing around me. I stood slowly and walked the aisle between server racks, scanning every corner, checking for movement. Something shifted in my peripheral vision, just a flash, like a shadow ducking behind a column. I spun to face it, but again, nothing was there. That's when I heard the footsteps, soft at first, almost shuffling, like someone dragging their feet down the hallway just outside the server room, then faster, quicker, growing louder, until it sounded like someone was running full speed toward the door. I braced myself, but nothing hit it. I checked the surveillance camera feed through the security system. There was only one camera covering the hallway, and it showed nothing. No movement, no one walking, but I could hear it, even now, faintly, like someone pacing just outside. I muted the feed and listened. The hallway was silent, but then something much worse, a whisper, from inside the server room. Close. So close it felt like it came from beside my ear. It said just one word, run. I backed into the far corner, heart pounding. There was no one in that room. It was impossible. I tried to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion. Auditory hallucinations happen, especially in isolated, cold spaces. But then the server rack to my left began to vibrate. The metal panels clanged softly like some tapping them from inside. I grabbed my phone to record it, but the screen refused to unlock. It glitched between the lock screen and a grainy camera view, and then it happened. For a split second, I saw something through the phone camera. Not through my eyes, just the phone. A figure, pale, bald, sunken eyes. standing behind me. I dropped the phone. When I turned, the space was empty. I couldn't breathe. I shoved everything into my backpack and prepared to leave. I didn't care about finishing the fix. I just needed to get out. As I reached for the server room door handle, I heard a long, low sigh behind me. I turned and saw, just for a blink, a face reflected in the shiny surface of a server. But when I looked directly, it was gone. I unlocked the door, pulled it open, and the hallway was dark, pitch black, emergency lights off. Every light in the building had gone out. I took out my phone, still dead. No flashlight, no signal. I hesitated, then used the glow of my laptop to step into the hallway. It flickered and then shut down too. Now I was in total darkness, and that's when the laughter started. Not a child's laugh. Not even fully human. Just a strained, choking laugh, like someone trying to force mirth through a broken throat. I ran. I ran toward the stairwell, stumbling in the dark, hands grazing the walls. Behind me, the laughter followed. It echoed. It surrounded me, like it was bouncing off the walls, closer and closer. The stairwell door was shut. I yanked it open and stumbled down, 2 steps at a time, gripping the rail to stay upright. Somewhere between the 7th and 6th floors, I heard the sound of something crawling above me. Fast, clicking sounds like nails on concrete. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what it was. I reached the ground floor. The front lobby was locked and shuttered. Of course it was. Holiday security. The night guard was supposed to be there. I banged on the side office window. No answer. The door to the security booth was open a crack. I pushed it open. No one inside, but the tea was still hot. Half a cup, steam rising gently into the air. I backed away. Something was deeply wrong. Then the monitor on the desk switched on. 1 camera feed. It showed the inside of the server room, but it wasn't empty. The figure I saw on my phone camera was sitting on the floor, knees to chest, watching the door. Its eyes were wide, mouth slack, and then slowly it turned toward the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. Then it stood up and walked toward the door. I ran. I found the emergency fire exit, bolted out into the alley, and didn't stop until I reached the main road where cars and people moved through the normal night. I didn't return to that building for the rest of the holiday. When I came back, I asked the night guard where he'd gone that night. He looked confused. He said he never left, said no one came to the ground floor, that the cameras had gone black for 10 minutes because of a power glitch. He insisted nothing unusual happened, but there was a new lock on the server room when I returned. I hadn't reported anything. I checked the logs again. Someone had accessed the room just after I left, but the thumbprint ID was unregistered. No name attached to it. Our system doesn't allow that. I checked the footage again. It was gone. All logs erased for that evening. But in one archived segment, a single frame hadn't been wiped. Just one. It was the server room. And the face again, pale, sunken, staring directly into the lens. No one believed me. I didn't expect them to. But I never worked there alone anymore. Not ever again. Story the end. I used to work the overnight shift at a small-town radio station just outside of Lawrence, Kansas. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but it paid decently and let me keep working toward my degree during the day. The station was old, built in the late 70s, and though it had a bit of charm, it felt like a relic trapped in time. The walls were yellowed with age, the ceiling tiles were stained in places, and the equipment had been barely updated since the 90s. Still, it functioned, and I didn't mind being alone at night, at least not at first. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I'd show up around 9:30, check in with the day DJ who was always eager to leave, and then I'd take over. The building was 1 floor divided into a few rooms, the studio, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and a couple of storage closets. Out back was the old satellite tower that broadcasted the signal. Sometimes it would make this weird low hum, like it was alive and breathing. For the most part, the job was simple. I'd play pre-approved tracks, give weather and traffic updates, maybe read a few late-night PSAs, and make sure nothing crashed. Between those duties, I'd spend time reading or doing homework. Quiet, peaceful. I didn't even mind the occasional creaks of the old place. Until everything changed that October. It started subtly. The first thing I noticed was that the studio clock was off. That may not seem like a big deal, but when you're operating a live radio station, every second counts. The master clock, synced with the system, was always precise. One night around 1:30 a.m., I glanced at it and saw it reading 1:19. I looked at my phone, 1:30 on the dot. Confused, I reset the clock manually. But the next night, the same thing happened. This time it was 10 minutes ahead. I asked Dave, the day shift guy, if he'd noticed anything. He shook his head. "Clock's always fine when I'm here. You sure it's not your phone?" It wasn't my phone. I checked with the wall clock in the break room too, always aligned with my phone. But the studio clock kept drifting, only during my shift. It felt strange, like something was trying to interfere with the structure of the night, as if it wanted me to lose my grip on time. Then came the footsteps. It was about 2 weeks into October, a little past 3 a.m., when I first heard them. I was in the booth, mic off, scrolling through a news article, when I heard what sounded like footsteps moving down the hallway outside the studio. Slow, steady. I froze. There shouldn't have been anyone else in the building. I got up, quietly and opened the studio door to peek into the hallway. Nothing. The lights were on, humming faintly. No sound. I walked slowly down the hall, peered into the break room, checked the bathroom, even opened the supply closet. Empty. I told myself it was the building settling. Old places do that. Creaks, groans. It's all part of the charm. I went back to the booth and tried to focus. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Sometimes it would be just a few steps. Other times it was as if someone was pacing back and forth down the hall. When I built up the nerve to check, there was never anyone there. No open doors, no signs of a break-in. I even left a mug balanced on the doorknob one night to see if anyone came in while I was in the booth. It never moved. Then the audio glitches started. During one of my broadcasts, while playing an old Billy Joel song, I heard a faint sound layered under the music, like a whisper. I thought it might have been a bleed-through from another frequency, but when I isolated the audio feed later, it was clearly in our system. It sounded like someone saying, "Let me in." Barely audible, but there. Chills ran down my back. I didn't mention it to anyone. Not yet. Later that week, around 2:45 a.m., I left the booth to use the bathroom. When I returned, the door was shut. I hadn't closed it. The booth door was heavy, required a firm pull to close. I stood there, staring at it, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the air pressure? But I knew that wasn't right. I opened the door slowly. The room was as I'd left it. Except the mic was on. Now, in radio, the mic on switch is physical. You can't accidentally toggle it by bumping into it. It takes intent. I always made a habit of turning it off before leaving the booth, no exceptions. And the feed was broadcasting live. Dead air. Just silence. I checked the logs the next day. The system recorded exactly 74 seconds of live silence while I was away from the booth. I shut it off and pretended it didn't happen. But then came the incident that really rattled me. It was the Monday before Halloween, 4:12 a.m. I remember the time because I looked at the studio clock and saw it reading 3:33. Wrong again, as usual. I was on my third cup of coffee, reading out an early morning weather update, when all the lights in the studio cut out. Pitch black. Only the red on-air indicator glowed faintly in the dark. I sat frozen for a second, then stood up and reached for the emergency flashlight I kept by the console. Just as my fingers touched it, the lights snapped back on. But everything in the room was off. The monitors were displaying code I'd never seen. Red lines scrolling, system errors. The feed had cut too. I wasn't broadcasting anymore. Then I saw the chair across from mine, the guest chair. It had turned. I hadn't heard it move, but now it was facing me. I turned around and left. I didn't shut anything down. I walked right out the front door, sat in my car, and waited until sunrise before going back in. When I finally did, everything was normal again. The feed was live, monitors fine, the chair back in place. I tried to talk to Dave again. He laughed nervously. "You've been working too many nights, man." I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my mind was cracking under the weight of constant darkness and isolation. But I started keeping a journal, writing down every odd thing. The clock discrepancies, the footsteps, the whispers, the chair. It helped me feel sane, until I found a page I didn't write. It was on a Tuesday. I opened the journal, and there it was, a shaky entry, scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. "Stop watching. He sees you now." That's all it said. I flipped through every other page, my writing, my notes. But that one entry, it wasn't mine. I took the journal home that night and didn't bring it back. From then on, things got worse. The footsteps became louder, bolder. I began to hear breathing behind me. Sometimes while reading the weather, I'd glance at the studio window, the one that looked into the dark hallway, and see the faint outline of someone standing just beyond the glass, motionless. Every time I stood up to check, they'd vanish. One night, during a commercial break, I caught my reflection in the booth glass. Behind me, standing in the far corner of the room, was a figure, not moving, not making a sound. I turned around instantly, nothing. But when I looked back at the glass, it was still there. I started recording myself during shifts, just voice memos on my phone. I never made it past the first 10 minutes of playback. Whispers. Shuffling. Once, the unmistakable sound of someone exhaling directly into the mic. I hadn't been speaking at the time. I took it to the station manager, told him I thought someone might be sneaking in at night. He gave me a look, the kind people give when they want you to stop talking. "Do your job," he said, "or I'll find someone who can." So I stopped talking, but I didn't stop recording. The final night I worked there, I set up a webcam on the console, just a simple USB cam, motion-activated, recording locally. I wanted to see what was happening during the dead air, if anything. That night felt different. Heavy. The air was thicker, like the walls were pressing in. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Around 3:13 a.m., the booth lights flickered. The power surged. For 5 seconds, everything went dark. When it came back on, the red on-air light was already on. But I hadn't turned on the mic. There was no music playing. Just the sound of a low, steady whisper. It filled the room. Indecipherable. It didn't sound like a person. More like a room full of people all murmuring at once. I stood up and slammed the mic off. The room went quiet. I packed up, took the USB cam, and left without saying goodbye. I quit the next morning, no 2 weeks' notice, just sent an email and never went back. Later that week, I plugged in the webcam, watched the footage. It was subtle at first. My usual routine, adjusting the console, reading, sipping coffee. Then the moment the lights went out, in the darkness, the webcam kept recording. Infrared mode. That's when I saw it. Someone, or something, was in the booth with me, just behind the chair. It wasn't human. Long limbs, hunched posture. No eyes. It watched me as I sat, oblivious. When the lights came back, it vanished, like it knew. I watched the rest of the footage in silence, shaking. That video's gone now. I wiped the drive, burned the journal. I don't talk about it anymore. Not in person. But I don't sleep much, and every so often I wake up to the sound of static, like a radio left on in the other room. Story. The end. Working alone at night has always been something I accepted out of necessity rather than choice. For nearly a year, I held a job as a night security guard at a medium-sized warehouse complex in the outskirts of a Midwestern city. The building was mostly filled with industrial equipment and stored inventory, and the company had a routine: one guard on site from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The pay was decent, and the hours fit my schedule, so I took it. The warehouse was an aging structure, originally built in the 1960s, with narrow hallways and a maze of offices, storage rooms, and loading docks. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but some flickered and cast uneven shadows. The security system was basic, a handful of cameras spread around the main areas, most of which had poor resolution. No guard company wanted the night shift, so it was usually just me alone patrolling in the silence. On my first few shifts, nothing out of the ordinary happened. The building was quiet, sometimes eerily so. I'd check doors and windows, record my rounds, and listen for any unusual sounds. The silence was broken only by my own footsteps or the occasional creak of the building settling. Sometimes the hum of the heaters and ventilation systems reminded me I was not completely alone. After about 2 weeks, I started to notice something odd. During the dead hours, roughly between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., I would hear faint noises coming from the loading dock area, which was behind a section of the building not frequently accessed. At first, I thought it was just the wind or small animals like raccoons, which were common in the area. But the sounds didn't quite fit that explanation. It wasn't just scurrying or rustling. It was deliberate, like soft tapping or knocking. The first night I heard it distinctly, I was walking the perimeter near the loading docks when I paused, hearing a rhythmic tapping. I shone my flashlight toward the source, but saw nothing. No movement, no shadows. The metal dock doors were locked tight, and I checked twice. Nothing unusual. The tapping stopped as abruptly as it had started. I shrugged it off. The next night, the same tapping started again around the same time. This time I was inside, near the offices that overlooked the dock area through grimy windows. The noise came again, slow and steady. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 4 knocks. It was too rhythmic and patterned to be random. My unease began to grow. I started taking my rounds more seriously, paying closer attention to doors and locks. Every time I got near the loading docks, the tapping would stop. One night, I decided to watch the security monitors from the control room, focusing on the dock cameras. At about 2 a.m., the monitors flickered, and I saw something I couldn't explain. A figure, a shadowy shape, standing just beyond the dock doors. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I swore I wasn't seeing things. I called my supervisor the next day and told him what happened. He laughed it off, telling me, "Old buildings make noises, and maybe you're just tired." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the following week, the tapping became more insistent. I started hearing faint whispers, low, unintelligible voices, drifting through the ventilation ducts. One night, while doing my rounds near the break room, the whispering stopped abruptly and a sudden cold chill filled the hallway. My breath became visible in the air, even though the building was heated. I felt frozen in place. Then a single word echoed softly but clearly, "Leave." My heart raced. I wanted to believe it was a prank or my imagination, but I was alone. The next day, I talked to a couple of the day shift workers and asked if they'd ever experienced anything strange. One older man looked at me carefully and said, "You know this place was built on the site of an old factory, right?" I shook my head. He explained that decades ago there was a tragic accident here. A fire broke out during the night shift, killing several workers trapped inside. The building was rebuilt, but locals said some of the old spirits never left. I laughed nervously, but part of me believed him. That night, as I made my rounds, the tapping started again, louder this time. I approached the loading dock door slowly, flashlight in hand. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. My radio crackled with static. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from behind. I spun around. No one. I felt a cold breath on my neck. I ran to the control room and locked the door, but the monitors flickered erratically. A shadowy figure appeared on the screen, standing at the loading dock. Then it disappeared. I stayed locked in the control room until my shift ended. The next day, I quit. Months later, I passed by the warehouse on my way home. The building was abandoned now. I stopped and looked through the windows. In the corner of the loading dock area, I saw a shadowy shape again, still watching. I've never gone back. Story the end. It was the last week of December when the city got hit with a brutal cold front. One of those nights where the streets were quiet, the air was thin, and everything felt slower, heavier. Most people had taken time off for the holidays, but I volunteered to stay behind and manage some year-end reports. My office was in a mid-rise downtown, an old government building converted into private rentals and shared spaces. We occupied the 6th floor. By the time it hit 8 p.m., I was the last person in the office. I knew that because the lights on our floor worked on individual switches, and I was sitting in the only lit area, a small island of desks near the center. The hallway lights and most of the open concept space were dark, and only my desk lamp and the warm glow of my monitor provided any sense of comfort. I was sipping cold coffee, clicking through spreadsheets, trying to ignore the occasional creak and groan of the building settling. That kind of sound never bothered me until that night. Around 8:20, I noticed something out of place. From where I sat, I could see down the hallway to the glass doors that led to the elevator lobby. The doors were supposed to be locked after 7 p.m. Anyone entering had to use a key card. That included even us employees. But I saw movement in the reflection of the glass, a flicker like someone walked past the elevator. I paused my work, squinting at the reflection. Nothing now. Maybe I'd imagined it. I went back to my screen. 10 minutes later, I heard the elevator ding, not once, but twice, like someone pressed the button, then changed their mind and pressed it again. I slowly stood up and walked to the glass doors, looking out. The elevator lobby was empty. I scanned the hallway behind me. Nothing but shadows. Still, something didn't feel right. I went back to my desk and checked the building's access log. We had a simple internal dashboard linked to the security system that tracked employee entries. It showed my key card being used at 7:11 p.m. and no other entries since. Then at 8:32 p.m., a new entry popped up. Unknown access, floor 6 elevator, no key card, no name, just access granted. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't supposed to be scared. I was in a secure building. But something about that log, about the fact that it didn't register a person, just a phantom access, made me feel watched. I decided to call it a night. I packed my things, shut down my workstation, and grabbed my coat. When I walked out into the dark office space, it felt colder than it should have. My footsteps echoed louder than usual. As I reached the glass door leading to the elevator lobby, I saw something that made me stop cold. A handprint. A single, fresh, foggy print on the inside of the glass. It wasn't there earlier. It was low at about waist height and smeared slightly as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass and slid it down. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. Then, the elevator dinged again. I jumped back, watching the doors. They opened slowly with a mechanical groan. No one stepped out. I walked cautiously over, peeked inside. Empty. I stepped in quickly and pressed the ground floor. The doors started to close. Right before they sealed shut, I saw something move in the reflection. Behind me, in the office. It was quick, just a blur, but it was there. When the doors opened to the lobby, I practically ran out. The security guard, Matt, was behind the front desk. "Hey," I said, breathless. "Did you see anyone go up?" He shook his head. "Nope, you're the only one still working tonight." "You sure?" "Checked the cams about 20 minutes ago. Dead quiet." I hesitated before asking, "Can I see the footage?" He gave me a weird look but nodded and turned the monitor toward me. We rewound the tape. At 8:32 p.m., the elevator on the 6th floor opened. No one was inside. But something was wrong. The camera flickered for 2 frames, and in the static, there was a shape in the elevator. A black shape, thin, hunched forward. The kind of thing you don't want to believe you saw because there's no reason for it to be there. I paused it and leaned closer. "Can you zoom in?" Matt tried, but the image got too pixelated. Still, the outline remained, a figure, unmoving, almost like it was waiting. "Could be a glitch," he offered uneasily. "Old cameras." "Yeah, maybe." But I knew better. That night, I didn't sleep much. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something worse, that the shape wasn't just a trick of bad video. I even dreamt about it. Only in the dream, it was standing at the end of my bed, face indistinct, hands hanging by its side, watching. The next day, I told myself I overreacted. I went back to work around 10 a.m., trying to act like nothing happened. Everything was normal. People were back, laughter from the break room, a morning meeting, phones ringing. It was like the place exhaled after holding its breath all night. But something stayed off for me. Later that afternoon, I ran into Joanna from IT and I asked her about the access logs. She frowned and pulled it up on her tablet. "There was an unknown access last night." "That you?" "No, that's the point. Strange. The system usually logs a key fob or at least a visitor badge. This one, it's just access granted. Weirdest part, it doesn't even say which elevator was triggered. It was the one on my floor." She nodded slowly. "We've had ghost reads before, but this is different. This log shouldn't exist unless someone or something used admin clearance. And no one has that except the building engineers. The engineers weren't even on the schedule that week. 2 nights later, I had to work late again. It was just after 9:30. I was deep in a report when I felt like someone was standing directly behind me. Not close, but at the edge of awareness, like how you sense someone's eyes on your back. I turned around slowly. No one. I stood up, heart racing. Then I heard it. Click, 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 like the sound of fingernails lightly tapping glass. I followed the sound to the conference room. The room was dark, but the blinds were slightly open. From the hallway, I could see just enough. There was something inside, a tall silhouette near the far end, standing by the glass, head tilted, unmoving. I backed away quietly, not daring to breathe. The lights in the room flicked on. Empty. But on the whiteboard, in thick black marker, a message had been written, "I can see you." No one else was supposed to be there. I hadn't heard a single door open or close, and I certainly hadn't heard the marker. I ran. This time, I didn't bother with the elevator. I took the stairs down 6 flights and nearly twisted my ankle on the way. When I burst into the lobby, Matt wasn't there. The front desk was empty. The building felt abandoned, like I'd stepped into some parallel version where I was the last person on Earth. Then I heard something coming down the stairs above me. Not footsteps exactly, more like dragging. A soft, heavy sound of something moving slow but steady. I bolted out the front door and didn't stop until I got to my car. The next day, I tried to report what had happened, but no one took it seriously. Joanna checked the cameras again. Footage was corrupted. A 6-minute gap, starting at 9:28 p.m., exactly the time I heard the tapping. I never worked late again. But the office changed after that. People started whispering about weird things. Voices in the vents, screens turning on by themselves, cold spots near the elevators. One guy said he came in early and found all the chairs turned to face the hallway. Another swore he saw someone walk into the restroom and never come out. Eventually, the company decided to move buildings. The 6th floor was sealed off. Officially, it was due to structural concerns. But I know better. Whatever got in that night, whatever found its way into our space, it wasn't interested in leaving. Sometimes late at night, when I drive past the old building, I look up at the 6th floor. And I swear there's always one light on, faint, flickering, waiting. Story the end. I remember the night clearly, even though I've tried to bury it as far back in my mind as possible. I was working the night shift alone at a small independent bookstore in a sleepy town. The store was a narrow 2-story building wedged between a cafe and a tattoo parlor. The owner, an older woman named Marge, had left me the keys and said she trusted me to lock up safely since she was heading out for a few days. I didn't mind the night shifts. They were quiet, and the pay was decent enough to cover my rent. Usually, I'd spend my time shelving books, reading, or reorganizing. There was no real rush or pressure, and I liked the calm that came with being the only person there. The only downside was how isolated it felt, especially after midnight. That particular night was gloomy. Rain was pounding the windows, and the streetlights outside flickered occasionally. The town itself was practically deserted. The tattoo parlor next door was closed, and the cafe across the street had its shutters pulled down tight. It was the kind of night where the silence felt thick and suffocating. Around 11:30 p.m., I was in the back room sorting some returned books when I heard the bell above the front door chime. That was weird because I was pretty sure the door was locked. I stepped out to check, and there was no one there. Just the wet, empty street. The rain had washed away any footprints, and I even glanced down the block to see if maybe someone had darted off into the darkness, but the street was empty. I shrugged it off and went back to the books, but my skin prickled. Then, about 15 minutes later, the bell chimed again. This time, I froze. The hairs on my neck stood up. I rushed to the front and looked out, but again, nothing. No one. No cars. Just the sound of the rain hitting the pavement. I thought maybe a gust of wind was pushing the door just enough to trigger the bell, but it felt like the door was locked tight. I tested it. It was locked. Unease crept over me. I locked the door again, double-checked the deadbolt, and went back inside, telling myself it was just the storm messing with the old door mechanism. I tried to focus on work, but every now and then, that little bell would jingle softly in my mind, making me jump. Around 1 a.m., I decided to take a break. I grabbed my phone and headed to the back room to check some messages. That's when the power flickered, once, twice, and then went out completely. The whole building was plunged into darkness. I sighed and fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, but the screen was dead. Great. The storm had knocked out the power. I was alone in a dark bookstore, surrounded by towering shelves and miles of books. My breath felt tight in my chest. I went to the emergency cupboard and grabbed the flashlight Marge kept for situations like this. The beam was narrow and weak, but it was better than nothing. I figured I'd wait out the outage near the front desk, where the big windows let in the dim light from the storm outside. As I moved through the aisles, the flashlight beam danced over the book spines. The shadows looked like people standing silently, watching me. I shook my head. Ridiculous. It was just the storm. Then I heard it, soft footsteps behind me. My heart stopped. I froze and spun around, swinging the flashlight beam wildly. Nothing, just empty aisles. I told myself it was the old wooden floor settling or maybe a rat. But then the footsteps started again. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I backed away, trying to stay calm, and reached the front desk. I locked the register drawer, grabbed my phone again, and tried to turn it on. Still dead. I pulled out my emergency key and unlocked the front door. If the power was out, the alarm system wouldn't work anyway, and I just wanted to get outside. As I stepped out, the rain hit me like a wall of cold water. The street was empty, dark except for the flickering street lamps. I looked around, shining the flashlight over the sidewalk and street. There was no one. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. When I looked up, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the cafe's closed shutters across the street. At first, I thought it was a person wearing a dark hoodie, but the figure didn't move. I squinted, and it seemed like it was just a shadow or maybe a trick of the light. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks because of the stress. I went back inside and sat down at the front desk, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something on the floor. Footprints, muddy, wet, and small, like someone had walked right through the front entrance. But the door had been locked, right? I stood up and inspected the footprints carefully. They led from the door to the back of the store, then vanished near the shelves. I called Marge on my phone, still no signal. I tried calling 911, but there was no service. I was completely cut off. My hands trembled as I grabbed the store phone. It was connected to a landline, but when I picked it up, all I heard was static. Suddenly, the store's old speaker system crackled to life. It was faint at first, like someone whispering. Then it got louder, a soft, rasping voice, repeating one word over and over. Leave. I dropped the phone in shock. The voice stopped. I froze. Then the footsteps came again, right behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. No one. But the air was thick, almost suffocating. I decided I couldn't stay. I grabbed my jacket and ran to the back exit, which led to a narrow alley. As I opened the door, I saw something on the ground, a tattered book lying open. Curious despite myself, I picked it up and shone the light on the pages. It was a diary, handwritten, the ink smudged by rain. The last entry chilled me to the bone. It spoke about a man who worked the night shifts alone in the bookstore decades ago. He had heard the same footsteps, seen the same shadowy figure. The diary ended with the man writing that something not human haunted the store, that it was waiting for him. The entry stopped abruptly. I slammed the diary shut and dropped it back on the ground. I ran down the alley and kept running until I reached a gas station with a payphone. I called the police and told them everything. When they arrived, they searched the store, but found nothing. No footprints, no shadow, no diary. Marge said the store's power had gone out several times over the years, but she never worked nights alone. I never went back after that night. Sometimes when the storm hits and the power flickers, I still hear that bell jingle in my mind, like someone or something is standing just outside the door waiting for me. Story, the end. I started working as the night security guard at an office complex just outside of a quiet part of town. It was a 5-story building, mostly filled with law firms, tech startups, and one floor dedicated to a property management company. The building wasn't particularly new, built sometime in the 1980s, and although it had been remodeled, it still had that cold, sterile atmosphere. At night, it felt like a hollow shell. My shift ran from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. I was mostly there to deter vandalism and make sure no one broke in or stayed behind after hours. I had a little office on the ground floor with monitors connected to the building's security cameras. They were grainy and sometimes glitched, but they worked well enough. I did rounds every hour, checking all the floors and stairwells. I kept a logbook, noted any unlocked doors, lights left on, or strange noises. It was monotonous, but I was fine with that. Quiet meant nothing bad was happening. My first week was uneventful, but that changed in the second week. I remember it started on a Tuesday night. I was doing my 11 p.m. round when I noticed a light on in an office on the 3rd floor. The office belonged to a small private law firm. I figured someone had just forgotten to turn it off, which wasn't uncommon. I went in, turned it off, and logged it. But when I looked out into the hallway, I thought I saw someone standing near the stairwell door. Just the silhouette of a person, still and barely visible. My heart jumped into my throat. I flicked on the hall lights fully, but the figure was gone. I walked down to the stairwell, opened the door, and checked it. No one. I even called out, but nothing. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, that maybe I'd seen my own reflection faintly mirrored in the glass. The rest of the night was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That sensation didn't go away. 2 nights later, it got worse. I was at my desk watching the monitors when one of the camera feeds flickered and went black, the feed from the 5th floor hallway. I tapped the monitor casing, thinking it was just a loose wire or connection. The feed came back, but what I saw made my skin crawl. There was a person standing directly in front of the camera. I couldn't make out any details, just a blurry, slightly out-of-focus figure. Not moving, just standing there, facing the camera. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and when I looked again, the feed was empty. The hallway was clear. I rewound the footage, but the moment where the figure appeared had been replaced with static. Not skipped, just pure, noisy static. That never happened with the system. The cameras looped and recorded digitally with timestamps. I told myself maybe there was a glitch. I even wrote a note to have someone check the system, though I never followed through with it. That night during my 2 a.m. round, I heard footsteps on the 5th floor. That floor was only occupied by the property management company, and their offices were closed every day by 6 p.m. sharp. The employees there were punctual and boring. I'd never seen anyone stay late. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand. The hallway lights were on, which they shouldn't have been. And at the far end of the corridor, the same office light was glowing. It was the one directly beneath the camera that had glitched earlier. I made my way down the hallway, heart pounding with every step. I reached the door and tried the handle. It was locked. I shone my light through the small window in the door and saw nothing, just the empty office. Desks, chairs, filing cabinets. But then, for a fraction of a second, I saw movement, a shadow darting past the doorway inside. I stepped back, reaching for my radio, but it crackled violently with static. No matter what I did, it wouldn't transmit. It was like being cut off from everything. I felt exposed. Suddenly, the light inside the office clicked off. I stood there, frozen, unsure of whether I should unlock the door and go in or just retreat. I decided to head back downstairs and call the building supervisor, but my phone had no signal. The battery bar flashed red and the screen went black. Everything I relied on, tech, radio, even the lights, started to fail the moment I got near that office. The next night, I nearly called in sick, but I needed the paycheck. I started carrying a small personal recorder, thinking I'd document anything strange. If nothing else, it would help keep me grounded. That night was quiet until around 1:47 a.m. when I heard the elevator ding from the main lobby. No one was supposed to be in the building except me, and I hadn't called the elevator. I stepped out into the lobby just in time to see the elevator doors slide shut. I ran to them, pressed the call button, and waited. It was going up to the 5th floor. The doors opened again when it came back down, empty. I got in, pressed 5, and rode up. When the doors opened, the lights on that floor were off, except for that same office at the end of the hallway. This time, the door was ajar. The air was freezing. I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The office was filled with an unbearable stench, like rotting meat and damp wood. My flashlight flickered as I swept it across the room. There was nothing there until I turned toward the farthest cubicle. A figure was standing there, barely lit by the glow of my flashlight. I couldn't move. I just stared. It wasn't facing me. It looked like a man in a black suit, standing motionless, arms at his sides. But something was wrong with his proportions. His arms were too long, his neck too stiff. I whispered something, maybe hello or who's there? But the figure didn't react. I took a slow step back, and the floor creaked. The figure turned its head, just its head, nothing else, and looked straight at me. Its face wasn't right. The features were smudged somehow, like someone had tried to sculpt a human face, but stopped halfway through. No expression, just those hollow eyes staring. I bolted. I didn't even wait for the elevator. I sprinted down the stairs, heart in my throat, not daring to look back. When I reached my office, the camera feeds were flickering violently. I saw flashes of the figure on multiple floors, first on the fifth, then the fourth, then the second, moving without walking, just appearing frame by frame, closer and closer. I left the building and spent the rest of the night in my car. The next day, I filed a report with my supervisor. I didn't mention the figure. I just said there were strange noises, lights turning on by themselves, and camera glitches. He nodded slowly and told me something I've never forgotten. "You're not the first night guard to report weird stuff on that floor. Last guy quit without notice. One before that stopped showing up." I asked him why the company still kept that floor open. He said they're tied into a lease with the property management group. That office used to belong to a small business that folded years ago. No one's used it since. They keep the lights off to save power. You probably just saw your own shadow or something. I asked him to review the security footage, but he told me the servers had glitched overnight and the data was corrupted. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said I'd keep an eye out. The next few nights were worse. The elevators would move by themselves, lights turned on and off randomly, and the figure, it stopped staying on the fifth floor. Sometimes I'd be walking the first floor, and I'd hear my name whispered softly, coming from a dark office. Other times I'd see reflections in the glass that didn't match mine. Once, I passed the break room window and saw someone sitting inside, but when I opened the door, it was empty. The worst night was a Thursday. I was sitting in the security office trying to stay awake when all the monitors suddenly went black. The emergency lights kicked on. My flashlight didn't work, my radio didn't work, and my phone was dead again. That's when the tapping started. It came from outside my office. Soft, rhythmic tapping on the glass window. I thought it might be a bird or something until I realized it was coming from the inside of the window. I turned slowly. There was a hand pressed against the glass, pale, long fingers, and a blurred face behind it, almost as if the glass distorted it intentionally. I stumbled backward, fell over my chair, and when I scrambled back up, the hand was gone. I quit the next day, told them I found another job, and walked out without ever collecting my last check. I still drive by the building sometimes, just out of curiosity. It's still there, still open, but I noticed something. The lights on the fifth floor, they're always on now, even during the day. Story the end. I used to work as a night custodian for a medical supplies warehouse on the outskirts of a small town in Virginia. The building was old, built in the early 70s, and the interior hadn't been significantly updated since. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering just enough to be irritating, and the ventilation system always made these strange, low moaning sounds at night. The warehouse was surrounded by woods on two sides and a long stretch of unused train tracks at the back. It was isolated, and after 6 p.m., no one else was ever there except me. My job was straightforward. I cleaned the offices, restocked supply closets, ran floor scrubbers, and occasionally handled after-hours deliveries. I clocked in at 8 p.m. and out at 4 a.m. The building had security cameras and motion sensors, and my supervisor could monitor them remotely, but I rarely interacted with anyone after dark. I'd taken the job because I needed solitude, but I wasn't prepared for the kind I eventually got. The first few weeks were normal, boring even. I had a routine: start in the lobby, work my way through the executive offices, clean the break room, and then tackle the warehouse floor with the big scrubber machine. I listened to music or podcasts most nights just to stay awake. Occasionally, I'd get a weird feeling like I was being watched, especially near the supply cages at the back of the warehouse. It was gross, but I always brushed it off. Things started to shift one Tuesday night around midnight. I was in the break room finishing a soda, preparing to mop the back hallway that led to the manager's office. I remember noticing the hallway lights were already on. That was odd because I always turned them on myself as I went. None of the lights were on timers and they had to be physically flipped. Still, I figured maybe I'd left them on earlier without realizing. I went down the hall, mop bucket squeaking behind me, and started cleaning. Halfway down the hall, I froze. The manager's office door was wide open. I never opened it. It was always locked. It had a push-button lock that could only be turned with a key, and I wasn't issued one. I walked up to the doorway, peered inside, and saw that everything looked perfectly in place. Desk lamp off, blinds drawn, computer screen dark. But then I saw the chair. It was turned to face the corner of the office, not the desk, as if someone had been sitting in it, staring directly into the wall. Something about that chilled me to the bone. It was such a subtle thing, and maybe the manager had just turned it before locking up the night before. But I couldn't shake the image. I stepped inside, turned the chair to face the desk again, and backed out slowly. I closed the door and tried the handle. Locked. It clicked into place. I stood there a moment, stunned. How had the door locked itself? I walked back down the hall and turned off the lights. As I passed the break room window, I saw my own reflection. Except I wasn't moving, and my reflection was. The figure in the glass turned slowly and looked at me. Its mouth was slightly open, and the face was off like a blurry, imperfect copy of mine. I blinked hard, turned on the break room light, and saw only myself staring back. That's when I knew I couldn't write it off as just being tired. The next few nights, more things started happening. I would find the same mop moved to different corners of the building. A rolling cart I had just parked would be found 30 feet away, wheels turned as if someone had pushed it there. I set up my phone to record video while I cleaned one night, pointing it toward the back of the warehouse where I kept seeing flickers of movement from the corner of my eye. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, I saw a faint silhouette walk across the screen. No features, no sound, just there and gone. I showed the clip to my supervisor. He told me the motion sensors had been going off sporadically between 1 and 3 a.m., but only in that back section. He assumed it was a raccoon or something getting in through the ventilation system, but I knew better. I asked if there had been any history with the building, anything unusual. He hesitated, then told me something that made my skin crawl. 10 years ago, one of the night workers had died on the job. They found him at the back of the warehouse floor near the loading dock. He'd collapsed. Heart attack, they said. But when EMS arrived, his body was curled in a fetal position, his eyes wide open, and both hands covering his ears like he was trying to block something out. There had been no signs of trauma or foul play, but the footage from that night mysteriously disappeared. The cameras blinked off at exactly 2:14 a.m., the same time the motion sensors now regularly activated. He laughed it off like it was just one of those workplace myths, but his eyes said something different, like he regretted telling me. That night, I decided I would leave the lights on and avoid that entire back section unless absolutely necessary. But around 2:10 a.m., the power cut out. Everything went black except for the red glow from the exit signs and the tiny LEDs on the security monitors. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the maintenance closet to check the breaker. As I passed the supply cages, I heard a soft humming. It sounded like a lullaby. I froze, every hair on my arms standing up. No one else should have been there. I hadn't let anyone in. I checked the logs, and there were no after-hours deliveries scheduled. I crept toward the sound. The flashlight flickered as I neared the back of the warehouse. The humming stopped abruptly, and I heard a whisper instead, right next to my ear. "Go back." I spun around, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing. No one. My heart pounded as I backed away. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking in the opposite direction, fading into silence. I went straight to the front door and waited outside until my shift ended. It was below freezing, but I didn't care. I called in sick the next night. When I returned 2 days later, things had only escalated. The monitors showed movement in the back warehouse almost constantly between 2 and 3 a.m., even when I was standing in the front of the building. Sometimes I'd hear faint tapping on the walls or ceiling, almost like someone knocking from the inside. One night, I found the men's restroom door swinging open and shut by itself. I wedged it closed with a chair, only to return an hour later and find the chair on the opposite side of the hallway, upside down. I started documenting everything, each anomaly, each strange noise, each time I found something out of place. I even made diagrams of where objects were before and after my rounds. It didn't help. If anything, it made me more paranoid. Then came the night I truly broke. I was scrubbing the warehouse floor with the big machine, the rotating brush screeching faintly against the concrete. The machine has a rearview mirror attached so you can see behind you. I rarely used it, but that night, something told me to glance. I wish I hadn't. Standing directly behind the scrubber, reflected in the mirror, was a woman. Pale face, black eyes, lips slightly parted like she was about to speak. Her hands were outstretched, not in aggression, but like she was trying to stop me, like she was desperate for something. I slammed the emergency brake and jumped off the machine. When I turned around, she was gone. I didn't sleep that day. I didn't eat. I just sat in my apartment, curtains drawn, every light on, questioning my sanity. The final straw came a week later. It was 3 a.m., and I was in the break room again. I had stopped doing rounds. I just sat there and waited for the hours to pass. The building was silent except for the usual mechanical groans. Then I heard the fire alarm. Not the full building alarm, just the isolated alarm in the rear hallway. I got up and checked the monitor. Camera feed for that hallway was black. I checked another camera. Black. All the rear feeds were dead, and then the smell hit me, burning hair and something sickly sweet like spoiled fruit and melting plastic. I grabbed my bag and left without clocking out. I never went back. I got a job at a gas station on the other side of town working day shifts. It's boring and loud and nothing weird ever happens, and I'm thankful for every minute of it. Sometimes I still get voicemails from my old job, just empty recordings, nothing but static. Once, late at night, I picked up out of habit. There was silence for a long time, then the same whisper I heard that night in the warehouse, breathy and right in my ear. You shouldn't have looked. Story the end. I worked for a small-town newspaper in northern Illinois for about 6 years. Most of my duties were editorial, editing submitted copy, laying out the print edition, updating the website. But because it was such a small staff, I also helped with production when needed. That meant staying late some nights to oversee the printing or to make sure the next morning's paper was ready for delivery. We worked out of an old 2-story brick building that had been around since the late 1800s. Back when the newspaper was first founded. The bottom floor held the printing room, storage, and mechanical stuff. Upstairs were the offices, editorial, advertising, and the publisher's suite. The building was drafty, always smelled like old paper and ink, and creaked like it had bones. I never felt uncomfortable there during the day. But at night, especially when I was alone, the place had a different energy. You could feel it the moment the sun dipped and the town outside went quiet. The streets would empty, and the only sounds left were the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional groan of the radiator, and the distant clicking of the streetlights outside. I usually wasn't the only one working late. The sports editor was a night owl, and the publisher often stayed late to finish emails. But that night, January 18th, 2021, I was alone. It was a Wednesday. A snowstorm had swept through earlier in the day, and most of the staff had cleared out before dusk. I had stayed behind to finish final layouts for the Thursday paper. I had my headphones on, a large coffee at my side, and a small space heater under my desk. Around 9:30 p.m., I got a call from my editor saying the roads were getting worse and I should leave soon if I didn't want to get stuck. I told her I'd be out by 10. I remember checking the time again when I finished the last page, 9:47 p.m. I started shutting things down, closing out files, backing everything up to the server. The usual. That's when I heard the first sound. Footsteps upstairs. Above me. I was on the second floor, the top floor. There shouldn't have been anyone above me. I paused and took off my headphones. For a second, I thought maybe it was snow or ice falling off the roof. But it wasn't intermittent, it was rhythmic. Step, step, step. It sounded like someone pacing directly above the editorial office. I walked to the hallway and stood beneath the ceiling, listening. It stopped. I waited a minute, then chalked it up to old building noises. It was easy to psych yourself out in that place. I went back to my desk and started gathering my things. Then I heard the file cabinet. It was unmistakable. The long, heavy drawer scraping open. It came from the file room down the hall, a place we rarely used anymore, mostly kept physical archives in there. At that hour, no one had business in there but me, and I hadn't gone near it. I stood up and walked toward the file room. I'll admit it. I was moving cautiously. The hallway was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to stretch farther than usual. I reached the file room and pushed the door open. The room was dark. I flicked on the light. The drawer of the old metal cabinet near the wall was halfway open. I stared at it for a long moment. Nothing else seemed out of place. No papers scattered, no signs of forced entry. I walked over and slowly pushed the drawer shut. It clanged with a loud metallic snap. The hair on my arms stood up. I checked every room upstairs, every office, every closet. Nothing. Completely empty. Just me. I locked the file room and headed downstairs to the back exit to leave for the night. That's when I saw the lights flicker in the stairwell window. Just a moment, like a shadow passed across the hallway upstairs. I froze with my hand on the doorknob. Then, slowly, I turned and looked up the stairwell. The light at the top landing buzzed softly. It looked normal. I told myself I was just tired. I'd been working a lot that week. Maybe the stress was making me imagine things. As I stepped outside, I felt something strange. It was dead quiet. Not just the town, everything. No wind, no rustling, no distant traffic. Just a thick, unnatural silence that seemed to suck the air from my lungs. I hurried to my car, the snow crunching under my boots like it was being swallowed. When I got in and started the engine, I looked up at the office window. Someone was standing there. Just behind the glass, barely visible, was a figure. Dark, unmoving. The lights were off in the room, but there was enough ambient light from the street lamp to make out a silhouette. A person. I stared at it, not breathing. It didn't move. Then the light in the hallway behind it flickered once, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the building manager. He checked the security system. The building didn't have cameras inside, only at the front and back doors. No one had come in or out except me. I kept that to myself. A few nights later, I had to stay late again. Another snowstorm was rolling in, and the Thursday edition needed to be finalized. I remember sitting at my desk and feeling watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, expecting someone to be there, but it was empty. Until it wasn't. At 11:11 p.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of the elevator. We barely used it. It was ancient, and the stairs were faster. But I heard the soft ding, and the doors creak open. I slowly walked down the hallway, heart racing, and peered down the corridor that led to the elevator. The doors were wide open. No one was inside. I waited, barely breathing. Then I heard it again. The file cabinet. That same metallic scrape, opening slowly. I turned around and saw that the file room door was wide open. I know I had locked it. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was being pulled toward it, like I had to see what was there. I approached the room, the sound of my footsteps almost muted. As I stepped inside, I saw that the same drawer had been pulled open again. And there, sitting on top of the files, was a newspaper. An old edition, February 8th, 1993. I picked it up. The paper was brittle, the edges curled and yellowed. The front page was a story about a house fire. A woman and her son had died after being trapped in the second floor of their home. The article said the fire had started from an electrical short in the boy's bedroom. I didn't recognize the name of the woman until I flipped to the obituaries. Jessica Moore. She had been a receptionist at the paper for 10 years, worked mostly nights, died at 36. Survived by no one. I'd never heard of her. I set the paper down and backed away from the cabinet. Then I heard something behind me. A low, choked sob. I turned. There was no one there. But the temperature in the room had dropped. I could see my breath. That was the last time I stayed late at the office. I told my editor I was having migraines and couldn't handle the night shifts anymore. She didn't argue. 2 months later, the building underwent renovation. They gutted the old file room, cleared out the archives. Everything was digitized. They painted the walls, replaced the floors, put in new lights. But I still don't go there at night. Even now, if I drive by after dark, I won't look up at the windows, because sometimes people say they see someone standing there, a woman in an old-fashioned blouse staring out into the snow, and sometimes they say she's not alone. Story. The end. I used to work night security at a small medical office building just outside of Syracuse. It was one of those squat, square, 2-story buildings tucked between a strip mall and a dentist's office, with a pharmacy and urgent care on the ground floor and a handful of private practices upstairs. My job was simple: monitor the front doors after hours, do 2 rounds of walkthroughs every shift, and report any suspicious activity or maintenance issues. Easy money, honestly. The kind of job you could fall asleep in if you weren't careful. The company contracted me out to multiple properties, but this building was my most regular spot, especially on weeknights when it was just me in the whole place from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. No janitors, no staff, Just me, some flickering hallway lights, and a radio that barely picked up static most nights. I wasn't new to being alone on the job. Solitude never bothered me. But that building had a way of making silence feel aggressive. It creaked and popped like it was still settling into its foundation, even though it had been there since the early 90s. The second floor, especially, always felt wrong. I couldn't tell you why, but the air up there seemed heavier, like walking through a space someone had just left, only no one had been there in hours. Things started feeling off in late October. The nights had gotten colder, and I'd started noticing strange details during my rounds. Lights on in rooms that had been dark the round before. Office chairs moved a few feet away from their desks. A few times I came back from my rounds to find the front door unlocked, even though I was sure I'd secured it. I chalked it up to my own fatigue, maybe being sloppy, maybe just overthinking things. But one night, around 2:45 a.m., I saw someone upstairs. It was during my second round. I had just finished checking the back exit near the urgent care and started up the stairs. As I reached the top step, I looked down the long corridor of the second floor, which stretched from the physical therapy office on one end to the OB/GYN office on the other. That's when I saw her. A woman standing still at the far end of the hall, facing the wall. She was barefoot, with a hospital gown hanging loosely off her shoulders. I only saw her for a second before the motion sensor light flicked on and she vanished. I stared at the space for a full minute, heart pounding in my chest. Every rational part of me tried to piece together a reason she'd be there. A patient? No. There hadn't been any appointments in hours, and the building was locked. A drug user who got in somehow? Maybe. But I checked every door up there, and they were all secured. I did a sweep of the whole floor. Nothing. I even checked the stairwells, the bathrooms, and the mechanical room. Nothing. I didn't report it right away. I knew what it would sound like. I was the only person in the building with no security cameras on the second floor, and I saw a woman in a gown appear and vanish. I'd get laughed at or flagged for sleepwalking on the job. But from that night forward, things escalated. I started hearing footsteps on the second floor when I was still downstairs. Once, while eating my dinner in the lobby, I heard the soft pat-pat-pat of bare feet pacing above me for nearly 10 minutes. I stood under the staircase and listened, frozen, until it stopped. The elevators would open and close on their own, even when I hadn't called them. I'd be standing near the front door and hear the ding, doors opening to no one. Then a few seconds later, the doors would shut and the car would ascend to the second floor. Sometimes I'd hear someone breathing right behind me. It was worst in the stairwells. Narrow and windowless, those spaces seemed to absorb sound. Twice, I heard a voice whispering my name in the stairwell, so soft and wet that it didn't even register at first. But it wasn't a name I used at work. It was my full first name, Benjamin, drawn out like a warning. No one called me that except my mother. I tried to laugh it off, but by mid-November, I'd become jumpy. My heart would race the moment I parked outside the building. I started skipping parts of my rounds, especially upstairs. It got to the point where I would just peek up the staircase and then mark it as all clear in my report. Then one night, something followed me. I had just finished my first round and was heading back down the second floor hallway when I heard a noise behind me, a soft dragging sound, like cloth scraping across the floor. I turned around, but there was nothing there. I continued walking, but the sound started again, this time closer. I stopped, turned around again. Still nothing. I moved faster. I made it to the stairwell, but as I opened the door, I heard it again, right behind me. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the stairs and didn't stop until I was in the lobby. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I didn't sleep when I got home. I kept replaying that noise in my head. I knew it hadn't been my imagination. It was real. And whatever it was, it didn't want me up there. A few days later, I brought it up with another guard, Joe, who worked the weekend shifts. He was older, closer to retirement, and didn't scare easily. I told him I thought I was losing it, that I'd heard things, maybe seen things on the second floor. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and said, "You saw her, didn't you?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who?" He looked around before answering. "The woman in the gown." I stared at him, trying to understand if he was messing with me. He wasn't. Joe told me that about a year before I started, a woman had come into the urgent care late at night, disoriented, barefoot, dressed in a patient gown. She wasn't in their system and didn't have ID. She claimed she had been a patient there years ago and had gotten lost on the second floor. But no one there recognized her. While the staff tried to figure out what was going on, she had a seizure in the hallway and died before paramedics could arrive. He said no one ever found out who she was. There was no record of her ever being admitted to the urgent care or any of the practices in the building. Eventually, she was listed as a Jane Doe and buried quietly. Joe said the incident started soon after her death. Lights flickering, doors opening and closing, cold spots. Seeing a woman pacing in the upstairs hallway. I wanted to believe he was just messing with me, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't lying. He finished by saying, "She doesn't show herself to everyone, only the ones who stay too long." I considered quitting, but the money was too good, and I didn't have another job lined up. I figured if I stuck to the downstairs and kept my rounds quick, I could ride it out. Maybe whatever it was would lose interest. But my last night at that building changed everything. It was the first snow of December. Quiet outside, snow piling up in soft layers. The building was dead silent, the kind of still that makes your ears ring. I was writing my report in the lobby when I heard the elevator ding. I looked up. The car was on the second floor. Then, slowly, it started descending. I stood watching. The doors opened. The woman was inside. She was pale, thin, with long, matted hair. Her gown hung off her shoulders, dirty and torn. Her eyes were black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, bottomless. She stepped out of the elevator, barefoot, and walked toward me slowly. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. She stopped about 10 feet from me and tilted her head. Then she whispered, "You stayed too long." The lights flickered and went out. I don't remember leaving the building. I just remember running, through the snow, through the dark parking lot, until I reached my car and locked the doors. I drove home shaking, every light in my apartment on until the sun came up. I quit the next day. I never went back. Never picked up another security shift. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear that elevator ding in my head. And I swear I can still feel her watching me, like she's waiting for me to walk into another building, to stay a little too long. Story the end.